Hello and welcome to another pattern recognition video featuring sacrifice patterns. I had a viewer recommend that I do some videos on sacrifices. So I did one maybe a couple days ago, and I thought I would do some pattern recognition videos on sacrifice patterns because sometimes it's hard to tell when to sacrifice, when to accept your opponent's sacrifice or when not to. And the more of these puzzles that you do, and the more often you see different sacrifices, the more you can add that to your memory banks and be able to use it in your own game. So I'll do at least 10 puzzles here. Pause at any time if you need to think longer. Okay, in this position, we just had a pawn push forward here to h4. So what can black do to go for the win here? How can we sacrifice? Well, you always want to look for checks, captures, and threats. Before every move or after your opponent's move, all the time. Look for checks, captures, and threats. Checks first because they are most forcing. What can we do here as far as checks? The queen could check. And let's see, other than that queen check here, the rook could check here. So maybe this is the sacrifice we're looking for. Let's take a look here. The rook attacks. If the pawn captures, do we have a good follow-up? And that's very important. You want to make sure you have a good follow-up. All right, so the queen could check here next. And because of this rook, the king would be forced to move forward, and then the queen could deliver a mate on g2. So when is it good to accept the sacrifice? How do you know? As you play more and develop your tactical skills, improve your pattern recognition, you'll be able to calculate better. You'll recognize more patterns, which is kind of like a shortcut, so you won't have to calculate as much. And, generally you're going to have to do some calculation to tell whether something's good or bad. So that does look good. If now the pawn does not have to capture that rook, what if the king just runs? Well, then maybe we could sacrifice or try to sacrifice the other rook, delivering a check. If the king doesn't take that, well, then our queen can get into the action. But I think with 3 attackers and only 1 defender, maybe you can count this pawn, but a pawn can't do too much in the way of defense. It's like a wall or a barrier. I'm going to go for this. All right, so after they take, now we can deliver a check. After that block, we just capture, renewing the check. And because of this rook, the only thing possible is for the king to move forward. And then we just deliver a mate here with rook and queen. All right, on to the next problem. We just had a queen capture here. Now what? Checks, captures, and threats. So we're looking for checks first. We could sacrifice our queen, but do we have any follow-up after that? I don't think there's much that can be done after if we sacrifice our queen here, the king just captures. So maybe we check with the rook, sacrifice the rook, king captures. We have this option maybe of checking and then grabbing the unprotected queen. But then, is that enough? We'll have a queen for the rook and knight, and then we'll have more pawns. So I think that would work. So unless we have something better, now what? That's probably the best way to go. So we'll do that. And we grab the queen. And so in the end here, we're ahead. We have, what, 13 points of material, and they have 8, 9, 10, 11 points of material. So, and we're threatening to pick that pawn off, so they'll probably have to try and defend. We're threatening to take the knight, so they'll probably have to move their knight. And then we can pick off another pawn. Anyway, I set these puzzles up for 1200 and lower. That way, beginners should be able to handle those. And you don't want them to be too difficult when you're doing pattern recognition, because then you're focusing more on calculation, but you'll still have to do some calculation. All right. What do we do here? There are not many options for sacrificing. Queen captures the knight or rook captures. Probably the rook, because then if the rook captures and the pawn recaptures, excuse me. So if the rook captures, pawn captures, queen captures with check, and that would be mate. So it looks like if we capture that knight, the pawn cannot really recapture, or he'll get mated. So that is why you don't want to capture, or the queen will recapture with mate. So we just grab the material there. All right, on to the next problem. I hope you're doing well with these and they're not too difficult. Feel free to leave any comments at any time and let me know if they're okay for you. And for those that have already done that, thank you. In the past, I had some viewers mention that if the problems are a little more difficult, well, it gives you an idea of what you might have to face as you begin to improve. Okay. What do we have here? Queen is threatening to capture this pawn with check. The knight is under attack. But really the queen moved up there to prevent a mate by the queen here. But that still doesn't stop white's attack. So how can white push forward here with the win? Pause if you need more time. If not, now something that's kind of a general rule when you're attacking a king, often it takes 3 pieces to get a checkmate. Sometimes less and sometimes more. And it also depends on how many defenders your opponent has. And that brings me to an interesting point. If you're trying to decide whether to sacrifice material, something that may help you when you're attacking a king or a certain area of the board, especially the king, if there are only a limited number of defenders, say there's 2 defenders around the king, but you have 5 attackers, well, you can give up 2 of your attackers for 2 of their defenders, and then those leftover pieces, the other 3, will be able to swoop in there, or however many extra you have. So we're going to give up this rook, and then the queen will be able to deliver a mate there. All right, on to the next one. We just had a capture of the pawn, attacking our bishop. What can black do here? All right, great little pattern here. Now, here we did have, I guess, a bishop kind of lined up towards the king, but that pawn was blocking, and then now it's, attacking. We don't want to capture that pawn, or then the rook could take us, or could it? because this will help you solve the problem if you haven't already. Look for checks first, and you'll notice that the queen with the rook have this battery fighting for control of this open e file. Well, they are controlling the e file. And the only defender of the back rank is the rook. And the king is also guarding this square. But what if the king was not there? What if the king was back here? Well, then you could sacrifice the queen and then bring the rook in for a mate. So hopefully you found the answer. Check, sacrifice the queen, and a back rank mate. So interesting setup there, and a queen sacrifice. And that kind of pattern I actually won in a tournament game where somebody had a similar setup like that, and I was able to win the game like that. All right, here we go. King has run over to the corner. H1. We have a rook lined up on the king, so maybe a possibility there. The bishop chased the king into the corner. And then we have a queen that could potentially join in the attack. So 3 attackers and really no defenders. These other pieces are kind of out of the way. So I'm thinking capture the pawn, driving the king forward, and then we checkmate with the queen. Capture and mate as the queen is attacking, preventing the king from running, along with the bishop that does that as well. Okay, 4 more to go. We just had a capture of what, a pawn there. Rook is lined up on our king, but it's our turn. What can we do? They only have 1, maybe 2 attackers against our king. And what do we have? We have a protected passed pawn here. We have 1 check, but their queen could just capture our queen, so that doesn't look so good. And we're looking for a sacrifice. So maybe the only other option is to sacrifice the rook for that pawn. And black should probably not take that, because if the king takes, our queen does not want to go over here and check, hoping that the king would move and then you could grab their queen, because they could block with a pawn or even the bishop. That's a possibility. So if we capture and the king captures, we probably have to go here with the queen. If the king goes back where it was, we could deliver a mate up here on d7. So let's take a look at this. Capture, check, and well, now we can just go up there and start pushing this forward, attacking their queen and getting ready to promote. So that is what the chess.com tactics formula or tactics program here wanted. Because now, what is the queen going to do? Sacrifice itself for that pawn, but then we have the a possible back rank attack. They'll be down a queen. All right, anyway, the final 3 problems. Here we go. What do we have here? A rook and queen battery lined up on the king. We have a knight. So here are our 3 attackers. They have really 1 defender, a couple pawns that are helping, but maybe we can break through. All right. That looks like it might work here. break through with a rook sacrifice. If the pawn captures, our queen captures with check, the king will be forced to run into the corner because the knight is helping as well, prevent the king from running to the center. And now, if the rook tries to block, we can just capture and mate. So the king will probably go into the corner. And then what? We just pick off this rook. So capture, capture, queen captures, king runs, we grab the other rook, then we're threatening a mate here on G2. The king would have to help guard against that, but we'll be ahead in material, I do believe, after all that. I don't know. We better take a look at this because we'll only be ahead by one pawn and they'll have a big majority over here on the queen side. So capture, capture, queen captures with check, king runs into the corner. We could just pick off the rook. That'll give our opponent time to defend. All right, I'm going to try that out. So that's what they want. Now, is there anything better here than just picking off that rook? Maybe that's best because we're threatening a mate right here now. So our opponent would have to defend, and they would not want to defend by bringing the rook over because then we could slide down here and deliver mate. So they would have to defend by what? Bringing the queen over. Anyway, to keep this moving, you can explore that more on your own if you want to go deeper into the problem. But, excuse me, black is ahead by a pawn. We do have all these passed pawns over here. The final two problems. All right, here we go. Let's finish this up. The rook is just defending here, so we can't capture the pawn with check. We have three attackers. Although, I don't know, two are attacking, the bishop and the queen at the moment. So, how do we break through? How do we break through this position? Maybe we can use this pin to our advantage. All right. Do we sacrifice our queen? The king captures. The rook can move over. But then the king can just retreat. And I don't see a good follow-up. Do we sacrifice our bishop? Capturing here. Pawn captures. Then our queen is under attack by the rook after that. All right. Well, this one is a little trickier than I expected. What else can we do? Do we just slide the rook over here? Threatening an attack? Maybe that's the way to go. If the pawn pushes forward, we can still just check because of this pin. We can just capture, I mean, with the rook. So maybe that's the way to go. We jump over here. We're threatening this pawn. The only way to protect that is to go here, but then we can just capture. All right, now how do we finish it off? Probably go up here. Or do we sacrifice the rook because they didn't accept the first well, they couldn't because of the pin. So our options now are bring the queen up and then go. But if we bring the queen up here, is there a defense? Or do we go there? We don't have a follow-up, so we got to go here. All right, so that one was a little bit trickier. I hope you did all right on that. Let's do the final problem here. Okay, rook is blocking this check that we just had on the king. So what now? What now? Oh, okay. We could just capture. If the king captures, which it would be forced to do, our other rook could deliver a back rank mate. So I don't know if there was much sacrificing going on there. That was kind of an even trade of rooks. And at some point, something must have been sacrificed because white is behind by a knight here. But back rank mate pattern here. The king is cutting off these squares and the rook is blocking that one, and our rook is delivering the back rank mate. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed those puzzles and did well on them. Feel free to leave any comments, like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.